Welcome to our July webinar at CopyPress. This is Dave Snyder, CEO of CopyPress. With me, as always, is Jennifer Ross.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking to our friends at Atomic Reach about AI, which is a really interesting topic, something I've been studying up a lot about, the difference between AI, machine learning, and really how marketers can use some of those tools. I think people will be surprised about how easy it is becoming for anybody to kind of get involved with that. But if you guys can go ahead and introduce yourself from the Atomic Reach team.
Thanks for having us, Dave. This is Bradley Silver, and I'm the CEO of Atomic Reach.
Okay. Was there somebody else on as well? Or?
Yeah, I have Carrie Hannaberry with us. Carrie is our Director of Marketing.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, so we really appreciate you guys joining the conversation. So can you give a quick overview of what Atomic Reach does?
Sure. We are a content marketing optimization platform that leverages AI. Essentially, what that means is we have taught a machine how to read, much like a human being processes linguistic information. And with that, we can analyze huge volumes of disparate data sets to understand the relationship between the content a marketing department produces and the way in which an audience behaves relative to their reading of that information. Very shortly, we help marketers make kick-ass content.
Yep. Yeah, that's that's a good elevator pitch. So we're going to talk today about how AI can be used to improve user engagement, which is right up Atomic Reach's alley, which is why we had them partner with us for this white paper. AI is perceived to be expensive and technical and challenging if you're not an enterprise. There are 4 common myths that we kind of focused on in this white paper, and we'll be doing in the webinar surrounding AI. And so we're going to kind of bust those myths as we go through. Myth number 1 is that AI is just a fad. I especially think that if you're working in an area like data entry or like some of these tasks that there will not be humans working in the next decade, that you need to wake up that this is not just going to go away all of a sudden. And one of the things that you can look at is just the revenue growth in the industry. You know, last year, 644 million, but it's on pace to hit 37 billion by 2025. And globally, you know, where the investments are coming from, China is a huge market for it. South Korea towards development. And so I think with South Korea, you see a lot of like, how are we going to integrate this into technology, like hardware as well? So, you know, with that myth, what are some of the things that you've seen as you've developed Atomic Reach and you've developed this concept where I'm sure you've seen over, especially the last 2 years, where people didn't really have a hold on even what AI was. And now all of a sudden, large companies are like, hey, we really need this product to understand our content better.
It's interesting. I think when we first started out, there was a very intense sea of resistance, especially because we work in an environment where it is a marriage between art and science. So you can imagine us having conversations with writers who have studied a craft that's been evolving for, you know, thousands of years. And we walk into an organization like a publishing environment and say, you know, we've got this intelligent machine that we've built that is going to help you produce better content for your audience. Imagine if I walked into your shop and said that to you, and this was before you knew anything about AI. What would your response to that be?
Yeah, I would kick you out. There'd be some violence.
Yes, it was visceral and emotional and violent, and it was, you know, get out of here. We are the experts and the artists of our craft, and that's the most fundamental and formative change for us. Is now we walk into an organization and those very same companies, and we say, well, let's take a look. Let's look at some of your content and get a better understanding of how really subjective the interpretation of words and language can be. But yet within that scope, there is a specificity to how you should be writing and can be writing relative to what your audience needs. And those decisions are really beyond what a human brain can comprehend in real time, but very easy for a machine.
Right. Do you think some of the resistance is because AI has just gotten bad press? Like, I think when most people think of AI, they think of total human displacement, because the more I've gotten into looking at how AI works with content and specifically, it's going to be a very long time before you have things like white papers completely written right at the same value level that a writer would write them. But where AI comes into place is allowing us to, do research faster, help to understand, like, how do we, like you said, the structure, the touch points of content, helping to make it better so people interact with it better. And what I look at is like, all right, when we first started using PCs or Word, right, and spell check is in there, right? Like, spell check is kind of a very base natural language processor. It's just something that writers use now to make their craft better all the time. Grammar and Grammarly, right? Those kind of things. Do you think that the reaction is such where they're like, well, they're just trying to displace us and completely eliminate our job?
Yeah, I think it's much like when we saw the adoption of web development and e-commerce, and people said, well, you can't replace bricks and mortar. And yet now, it's topical because it's Prime Day and Amazon's one of the biggest companies in the world, and people shop online, and we've migrated to a digital shopping experience and environment. And so, just to go back to that first comment that you made, I think being on the forefront of AI, and especially in linguistics AI, the notion of a machine writing a white paper or a poem or a marketing document, whatever the case may be, I think that sea of change is happening, and it's coming much faster than the world may be ready for or anticipates. But I think AI at a human level is the expression of our own creativity. So I think it is, while we're getting a machine to perform and think like a human being, it is a very human-based function, and our relationship to what the AI presents and delivers will change, much in the way the printing press changed the way communications were functioned 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've been talking to people about here is that, how does copy press adapt as we go? And through all my research, the one thing that kind of stays as consistent is there's going to be a need for content professionals to do the training pieces behind machine learning and AI, right? There's going to be people that need to essentially create the framework that right? Like, so the idea of a computer using a poem, sure, but there had to be training within the machine learning concept that happened for that to happen, right? There is always going to be a role for professionals to plan within that spectrum. And so I think this is more of an evolution than an extinction for writers and content marketers.
Agreed. And our relationship and our role as writers will change as the AI becomes more intelligent and sophisticated. But at the end of the day, the role of the writer or the editor or the creative engine, which will be the human being, will change, and there will be an interpretation of our own creativity, and we will rely on the AI just to make us more efficient with faster, more access to more data for decision making, but always controlled by our own creativity and interests.
Right. So the other myth, you don't have the technical skills to use AI, and this one is really interesting to me because there's been more and more tools that have been popping up that make it really simple for people to jump in and start utilizing AI. From the content side, recently I looked at Wordsmith AI, which is a service that's specifically trying to, not would say replace copywriting, but allow for copywriting where it is not economical to have copywriters, right? And so that system is set up to where content specialists can jump in and pretty much use a WYSIWYG, like a rich text editor like you're used to with WordPress, and quickly create the framework to generate tens of thousands of pieces of content. And so 80% of AI adopters adopt the technology to reduce their grunt work right now. There are lots of, and I think, so let's stop here for a second and discuss from your perspective, right? Like there's the technical term of what artificial intelligence means, but what fits in the classification of AI? Because I see the term being utilized for a lot of what may better be described as pure machine learning, right? So you have these different subsets of machine learning, deep learning, and then artificial intelligence is kind of this umbrella term that's used for both of those pieces. But from your side, and I guess as it relates to Atomic Reach, how do you guys categorize, artificial intelligence?
I think the fundamental difference is in a true AI environment, you've taught a machine how to perform a human-based function. So an example would be at Atomic Reach, the first thing we did was teach a machine how to read. And so it runs a neural net where you can give it any form of text-based content. It'll read the document and understand it in much the same way that a human being would. And from there, you can ask the machine to give you all different kinds of outputs, and we don't know what the output's going to be, which is the fundamental difference between sort of AI and computational analysis, where you would say, okay, I'm going to give you, a noun, a verb, a preposition, and an adjective, and this is the sentence you're going to create. In an AI environment, we can say, well, this is what I'm interested in, and this is who my audience is, and what can I do with this document to make it more interesting and relevant to the people I'm targeting. And the AI will give you a data set of language and information to then work with.
Right. I think one of the things that people are utilizing that they might not realize is AI are chatbots, right? Like chatbots are becoming a pretty prevalent concept. These things that are based on a mixture of natural language processors and then also training modules where there's somebody on the back end saying, semantically, this question relates to this answer, right? And so a lot of times now when we get into pop-ups that are coming online from different sites that people want to chat with us, they might not necessarily be a real person to begin with, but be a chatbot. And so I think that goes back to your thing, like, a computer doing the function that a human normally would, right? As opposed to simply finding correlations in data.
Yeah, and think about what you can do with that chatbot where, the chatbot, you can teach it things like, well, who are you talking to? And what did they ask you the last time you spoke with them? And what's happening in the world right now that's topical? And how does that impact their thinking and question choices right now? And with all of that information at your disposal, how can you formulate a response that really gets to the heart of, or the subtext of what that person's really asking you? So I think, in that kind of environment or context, Amazon's done an incredible job where with access to all of that information, they have an AI engine that makes product recommendations to you. And it's so accurate. It's almost like they're inside of your brain.
Yep. When asked what skills hiring managers look for to manage AI technology, 58% said active learning, 46% critical thinking, and 46% creativity. And I think those are interesting stats because those are right. Like when creative people are looking at AI and getting concerned, like my job's going to go away. No. Again, it's evolution. We still need people involved with all of it, right? It's just different. It's like in that movie, Charlie, the second Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, now Willy Wonka, where the dad loses his job to the robot putting the caps on the toothpaste, and then later on gets a job fixing the robots that put the caps on the toothpaste. Those are the human roles that are going to happen, right? There's going to have to be people training these bots and this AI to do what we need long term, and then assessing what's been completed and helping to improve from there.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying before, where I truly believe that AI is the expression of creativity. And so what it will give us the ability to do is apply it. The more creative we are in the application of AI, the more beneficial it will be. And so you put an intelligent, you put an artificial intelligence engine in the hands of a human. It's really, at the end of the day, up to the creativity of that individual to apply that AI in meaningful ways to make a formative change to improving people's lives and the quality of their world in which we live in, whether that's in a business marketing context or, in healthcare and hospitals. So that, the applications are intense and broad, and is really, the creativity is limited by our own imaginations. And really dependent on them too.
I mean, I think what most people don't understand, definitely that work in the space, is that AI, like as a concept, has been around since Alan Turing, right? And so we've been doing some kind of machine learning since 50s, 60s. And we're just reaching this apex now where technology is meeting, is kind of meeting the capabilities where we can actually do these things. It's not necessarily like, well, we never had the foundational elements from a math perspective to do this. Now we just have the technology. Things are becoming, right? Technology is becoming cheap enough where anybody can do AI, just thinking about the other day, like my kid was asking me for a terabyte like flash drive, and I was like, that would have been so crazy 10 years ago if he had asked me for that for his gaming. So it's just, I think people are so afraid because they're looking ahead and not thinking about what, like you said, what beauty can be created from this, not understanding too that historically this is something that's been developed and been developing for a long time. We're just kind of at this exciting point in time where technology is meeting the human, creativity in terms of creating these things.
Yeah, I think what's scary is really results from the technology universe in general, where we have, using the example that you just gave on the terabyte of, the memory storage, technology today enables us to accelerate research at a pace that is so unusual based on human history that we sometimes build faster than the world really is ready to adopt. And so I think that's one of the challenges that's not unique to AI. It's everywhere in technology that we can move so quickly and problem solve so fast and bring new tools to the market so quickly. Sometimes we lose sight that there are people involved, and the adoption curve and the education curve may be a little bit longer than where the technology is racing towards.
Right. So myth 3 is that AI is only used for one department. I think Atomic Reach is probably a good example of where you guys are a great example of that. Like, you are working in a department that's full of creative people that we, don't necessarily have engineers there, or people that, come from a data science background. I'm not saying at your company, but in general, your customer set, right, is not what somebody would have 10 years ago been like, yeah, this is where AI is going to be really functioning heavily. 62% of enterprises will use some form of AI technology by 2018. Like you said, we're already interacting with it day to day. Amazon, right, sending us products that are related to other products we've already bought. We're seeing, we interact with things like Waze every day that is telling us which routes might be best based on commuter data that it's getting. Any department that uses data or wants to automate repetitive tasks can tap into AI to streamline their operations. What are some of the more unique ways that you've seen companies utilizing your tool set specifically, or like, I guess, successes where, you're in this space where largely creatives, people that were apprehensive to this concept originally, and then they start working with Atomic AI, your product at Atomic Reach, and then they're all of a sudden like, whoa, light bulb, this is working.
I think we've seen some interesting relationships between maybe certain industries and topic areas and the way people like to interact with language. So I'll give you an example where you take financial services, Typically, and especially in a kind of environment, an institutional environment where financial services experts are talking to maybe brokers and other institutional type people, where they have an really good level of knowledge about their industry, quite technical, can understand complex concepts. But in general, we find when it comes to financial services type data, people like to interact with content at a very basic level. We're not sure if it's because people are, finances are scary and understanding markets are overly complex. And certainly at a consumer level, when, all we want to know is my money's doing okay, my retirement's intact, and that's really what I want to know. When it comes to healthcare, we see the exact opposite. When you get a spot on your skin, you all of a sudden want to know as much as your physician, and you will educate yourself to a point where you can really understand complex concepts and read language at a very high, not intelligence level, but knowledge level. And so we didn't expect to see those kinds of relationships, especially when it comes to producing, say, marketing or business type of communications. We thought, financial services, you're going to have to increase complexity. Healthcare, it's for everybody, you're going to have to sort of decrease complexity. But we saw the exact inverse relationship. And what that taught us is your audience's level of knowledge is the primary driver that defines how you should use language when constructing any form of marketing communications. The more knowledgeable they are, the greater their expectation of the sophistication of the language that you use. But the industry they're in will have an impact on the general norms that you should be behaving within.
Right. Yeah. I see like one of the huge benefits from AI for me that I see is on the sales side of content as well. Like just from the idea of getting right. So like in traditional sales writing and letter writing, headline crafting and then message crafting is something that you had to measure the impact of post, right? Like sending the email, like you'd get the ROI analysis and then you'd be like, all right, this was a good thing, but you weren't able to actually understand which part of it, right, was something that like had the effect. And with AI, you're able to say, okay, like this message, it was the subject line, and actually have that insight from your past data to be able to perform better subject lines, better actual copy even before you get started. And I think those are the kind of wins that people aren't necessarily understanding from this, is that we're going to be able to produce a more effective piece of content through all of this rather than just guessing, right? The art of guessing what might work and then hoping as well.
Yeah, it builds in predictability into the model, which is a huge cost reduction and efficiency gain.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been doing content stuff a long time, and invariably the question always comes back to like, what's the ROI going to be, right? And that's the tough part of having a room full of creative people that are like, thinking, well, no, we just want to do something cool. And I always tell people, like, your job is to sell stuff and make money, not to think of cool stuff. Like, if you would be a novelist, go be a novelist. But if you're working in marketing, we need to sell things or get people to buy stuff. And so we need to be able to have some kind of ROI analysis, and our plans need to come not from gut feelings, but from data. And we have way too much data nowadays not to allow that to fuel all of our decision-making with marketing. And then layer the creativity on top of that, right? Like, here's what works, layer the creativity on top.
Yeah, and think about it in the form of an entire workflow. So you talked about the subject lines. You have a subject line, you understand how to adapt that relative to the needs of what you're trying to produce and your audience. Then you write some copy associated with that. And then there's a whole bunch of other decisions that get made, like when and where do we market it? And what are the colors? What are the design elements? And which social channels should we push it to? And how often? And who's on those social channels? And how does that relate to maybe some direct physical marketing pieces we're producing? And how do we connect all of that whole communications chain and all the data we collect from that whole experience and put it together so that maybe what our direct mail is doing is very much in line with what our content marketing team's doing, and that's in line with what our social media team's doing, and all of those groups are then supporting the sales team, and AI brings all of those functions together.
Yeah, and interesting what you mentioned in terms of the cross-channel concept, because I've seen so many large campaigns. I'm thinking specifically like Super Bowl commercials that then try to have an online component put in with them, where AI now gives us the capability to understand like what messaging is going to resound in what kind of actions online, right? And be able to get a way better ROI out of these large expenditures than, again, just guessing at what might be a good idea. So myth 4 is that AI is too expensive for your company. And I think this is the one that's still pretty interesting to me, because AI is obviously becoming something that everyone is using, but still when I have conversations with people, you even mentioned things like, Amazon's machine learning utility, that they're like, oh, that exists, right? So it feels like with AI, we're kind of at this point where everybody's heard it. People are talking about it a lot. They see companies getting funded that are building stuff, but their familiarity with it isn't high, because part of it for me feels like the barriers to entry for them is their perception that it's going to be too technical for them, or their perception that it's going to be too expensive. Working with AI providers would only cost your company a few $100s per year. And I think the biggest thing there is, and this isn't what people do, right? So the biggest thing is looking at what your current cost is for some of the tasks that you'd be able to take AI and be replacing things, right? So a lot of things that we were using just pure analysts for can be done by machines. So the cost savings on labor, but then also from our side, and your business particularly, is now you can also give some kind of predictability with ROI, like we've talked about.
Yeah, and I think it's the efficiencies that you gain. So where you may be spending time and costs and doing a lot of data analysis, and that was the bulk of the investment. Now you look at it and say, okay, well, I can churn through that information in seconds or minutes. My time is now spent on thinking about what I'm going to do with this information. And so that, again, is the expression of that creativity. AI automates what typically is, often perceived as the mundane, but it also illuminates what was previously hidden to you. And with that gives you the ability and the flexibility and the time to make incredibly intelligent, informative, creative, and fun decisions. That you shifted the investment from what should be a machine-based task to a place where you're applying people in the way that they should be, on the thought process and the creativity and the application of that information.
I mean, I guess one of my questions there is, like, how long is it going to take for education to catch up? Because what I don't see right now is a lot of opportunities for people to take, like, okay, there's AI learning, computer science, right? But what we don't have right now is our comprehensive marketing programs that don't necessarily teach you to just how to work with tools, but what to do with the tools. Does that make sense? Like, here's a hammer. I know I can drive a nail in, but how do you build a house out of it? And I feel like that might be part of the stagnation, is like, we, as you said before, like, we haven't exactly caught up to where the technology is, not just in terms of our understanding, but like, how are we training the next generation to utilize it, right? I feel like even with my staff, that people that do kind of understand AI and work with it definitely on a day-to-day basis with tools that we utilize, it's really utilizing just a portion of what this tool does and not thinking about, all right, well, how do we take this and go to the next level with it?
And I think, now we think of AI as almost this big, scary black box, and there are people that are supposed to be dedicated to AI, and they're going to do what they're going to do, and I'm over here doing what I need to do, and they're separate things. I think in the next couple of years, we're not going to think about AI as this completely separate thing. It's a lot like web development. So, back in the 90s, web development, and you wanted a website, it was this big thing, and it was going to cost you an enormous amount of money, and this subject matter expert was going to come in and do it. And now web development is not a separate thing. Engineers know how to develop for the web, and they are synergistic things that are part of one another. I think AI is going to be the same thing. So we're not going to think of this this big, scary, independent thing. And I think that, you know, a lot of it will be incumbent on the technology companies that build AI tools to show how simple they are to use and how accessible they are. And then I think that are examples in the real world where AI is just entering our lives in subtle but important ways. Where, you know, I was reading an article the other day about Volvo, and they're training an AI engine inside of cars to recognize images and make decisions against what those images are. So you're driving and it sees a cat versus, you know, a parent walking across the street with a baby and a stroller, and it recognizes the image and then can say, okay, well, what are they doing? How fast are they moving? And what's happening around? Do I need to brake? Can I keep proceeding? Do I need to turn? Like, what are the decisions I need to make? And so that's an example of where AI is just going to arrive in our lives, and we're going to interact with it and, you know, benefit from it without the scariness of adoption.
Yeah, so you're saying the apex of AI isn't just my kids yelling at my Google Home to play music on Spotify. That's like the bulk of my home life with AI is children interacting with Google Home.
Well, but that's a good example as well, because our children, I mean, I have little kids as well, and we're growing up with this AI thing being new. That's all they know.
Yeah, that is what's interesting to me. And so I guess another question I had was, how often in your work with customers, like you sell a license for your product, and then maybe you have a follow-up with a client, and then you realize, man, you're only using 10% of what this thing can do.
Yeah, I think that's something that we struggle with, because we would like to push the boundaries and the envelope of AI, because we know how much value it can deliver. But it goes back to that, you know, you really do have to pay attention to adoption. And so, you know, for us, we would love to go into a big bank and say, hey, we're going to help you in data analysis, online marketing communications, offline marketing communications, social media. And the bank's saying, wait. You got to help us in one area first and let us get comfortable. And then maybe we'll go down this adoption curve with you. So I think that's a challenge that technologists suffer from in general. We want to do so much more with the technology, but we really need to wait for the world to be ready and move at the pace of the market.
Right. So going back, the role of AI in creative marketing strategies. So data-driven creative development. AI helps marketers learn more about their audiences and develop personas. In terms of that, like, what are some of the valuable feature sets you think you've been able to tap into in terms of developing audience models and persona development?
Yeah, so I think, like, we talked about it before, but for us, the one formative learning was, we refer to it as readability levels. That is the primary driver of audience behavior. It really has very little to do with, say, demographics, which is the way we tend to think about personas. So I've got this individual that represents a group of people, and they are, you know, this age, they think and look like this, and I'm going to produce communications in that way. What we learned is that if you have somebody who is engaged in a particular topic, that a 13-year-old female in Asia could behave the exact same way as a 60-year-old male in Ohio, because their knowledge on a particular topic is equal, and that informs how they read, what they read, and their ability to comprehend.
So, like, from a readability standpoint, are you guys doing your own scoring models, or are you using some of the traditional readability scoring, like based on, some of them do it based on grade level of reading? Or are you taking a mixture of that? Because one of the things I think is interesting, and I'm interested to see how it develops, is not just readability, but how is this new short form of writing that kids are learning, right, where all they're doing is texting, going to impact language long term? especially with social media and the messaging there?
So we look at our own form of readability. We'll use some of the traditional models, but where AI becomes super beneficial is we've built context engines. So we understand that the context of what you're talking about has an equal bearing on what you're doing and how your audience behaves. So an example would be, like, you could look at the readability of a word like running, but if you look at it without context, like, I'm running for president, I'm running for exercise, I'm running towards a business deadline, the context of that word has deep implications on how it's used and how it's understood. Again, then you look at the environment. So you have a kid saying running texting on a phone versus, running used in long form content, saying like a blog post. And then there's a third layer of AI where we need to look at the dominant concepts. So running used at a time, let's say when there's an election, versus running used in a news story where something horrific's happening and the world's aware of it, is automatically a predisposition to how they're going to interpret the use of that word. And that's where the AI gives you so many opportunities to understand how it's going to be perceived, how I should use it, and what other forms of decisions I should make around this content that I'm crafting.
Right. So chatbots, when we talk about